And
we are recording.
Hey guys, thanks everybody for joining today. You can see that I'm actually here twice on the screen. Michelle Price iPad. It looks like I'm not muted, but I didn't actually join with audio on that because we had to get some feedback. So don't worry about that, the not red microphone hanging out there. So it's lovely to see everyone today, or lovely to see everybody's black boxes. A lot on Zoom, so this is a comfortable space for me. So I invite you to participate today, either by using your reaction buttons or by hand signals when I ask for some thumbs up, right? Also, I love working with librarians because we throw things in the chat, right? I love when people just throw their thoughts in there, right? I want this to be more open and kind of free and moving along. So let me get started, and I'm going to ask the people in the room, does anybody currently work at a campus that has a one-to-one device program where any one device, maybe not an iPad, is given to all of the students? If you could give me a thumbs up with the reactions button, or just a physical thumbs up.
We used to, but we don't anymore. So I don't know how to.
Oh, interesting. April, I can't wait to hear, because we're at the beginning of this, right? And so in a few years, I have to check in with me to see how we're doing. All right, does anyone have a institution issued iPad that they have to work with? We'll look for thumbs up again, or reactions. We fit all on my one screen today, so it's super easy to see. So I don't see any of that today. All right, so no, Dr. Elise Jordan says yes. Right, so I have a home iPad, and how I use that at home is quite different than how I use my work iPad. So that's why I made the differentiation between, do you have a work issued one? Because it might function a little bit differently because of security or the way you're allowed to use it on campus. So let me go ahead and share screen. And I'll get the presentation up, and we'll start our chat today. So we are talking specifically about iPads in the college classroom. It is exciting to think about iPads in our daily use as staff, but today I'm going to be focusing on the college classroom. So this is just my hello, and I realized I'm wearing my same sweater, April, as I sent you in the picture. So I must really love it. Makes me feel comfortable. So hopefully, you know, I'm relaxed and we have a good time today. So as you can kind of tell from my title here, I wear a couple hats at our institution. So St. John Fisher College actually was just reclassified as a DRU not that long ago. But there's some weird rules in New York State that are changing about, can you call yourself a college or a university? So we are in upstate New York, not downstate. And if you want to position us geographically, we're kind of right in between Toronto and New York City. So really great mega cities there. We're mostly residential here, but that's kind of changing as our graduate programs grow. But if you want to get an idea for the size of my institution, we're about 4,000 FTE, and we have 9 professional librarians, and that includes the director. So one thing I wanted to start with was just dispelling the myths that, like, I picked up an iPad last year and I was great at it. That's not true. This has really been a process. And so part of this process has been, right, and all of the images today that I grabbed are from Wikipedia. They're just pretty basic to help our conversation today, is that when I first started here at Fisher 13 years ago as the pharmacy librarian, they gave me a Palm Pilot, right, to start to use some of our databases for drugs like Lexicomp and Micromedics. So that was my first introduction to being a mobile ready librarian, right, specifically for work. Well, then as the technology changed, right, and we have a little bit here of the I kind of generation in the middle, then I had an iPod for work, right? And so I was like, ooh, look at how small and mobile this is. So it's really interesting how it's changing in size, flexibility. First we had a stylus, then now we're back to the stylus. And then the last piece here is interesting because the library was early adopters of iPads on campus. Our director used some funds, and so we got in right at that generation 1, which was fantastic. And then a little while after that, I won a vendor prize. I submitted a video of myself at work, and I used that grade to my iPad Pro, which has the keyboard. So you can see that in the picture. At the time, that was like revolutionary to have a keyboard on. So we're mobile, but it's almost laptop and not laptop. And that keyboard really changed how I was able to use the device. So while I was getting ready, the campus was getting ready. So this was not just the library. Hold on a second, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. There you go. All right, so it was no longer just the library being early adopters. It wasn't me just using my device. So the campus decided to be the first college in upstate New York to do a one-to-one Apple. And so it's a holistic approach. It's not just the early adopters. So how did we do this on campus, right? So it's one thing just to give students iPads, but really this is meant to be a transformational moment. And hopefully my examples really can attest to that kind of idea. So our college sponsor was called the Fisher Apple Academy. It was offered out from our DePeter Center for Innovation and Teaching. And so it was in two different sections. They're about a year apart. Some of it overlapped to catch up some people. But the first one was like a 3-week session. Right? And it was during the summer. We're like, yes, we'll do this. You ended up getting 6 badges from Apple, but it turned out to be a lot more work than we all anticipated. It was a lot of time on task. But I was really happy that I went through all of the pieces because, as I said, you might think you know your Apple device for your personal use, but by going through the Apple certified teacher courses, you really got to see all of the functionality that's in there and that could be used by students. It was really amazing and worth it, especially when we're talking about accessibility. So I won't be mentioning some of those options today, but there are so many accessibility features on the iPad today that really could help any of your campus members. Now, the second one was in-house application and sharing. So this was, you've gone through the techniques, you've gone through those pieces, and now we're going to get together as a group and we're going to talk about how to use these in class. So there was actually some in-class time. I'm just going to pause real quick so I can get an idea for everybody that's here. St. John Fisher College, we went back to full-time in-person last fall. And so a lot of, yes, so I see Joel's eyes there. Did anyone go back to full-time in person as well? You can give me a reactions thumb up or personal thumbs up. Maxine did. Dr.
My school never went online.
Oh, Janelle went back face-to-face. So we can see just from the small group today that about half were face-to-face and then half were online. So when I'm talking today, really our training was really meant for what do we do in a face-to-face classroom. Now I will show you some examples of how I've used my iPad in a Zoom setting. So it's not like it's not useful in it, but there's also some pieces here that are meant to be in a face-to-face place. So I have listed the URL here for our center down there just to give you guys a little bit more detail about how they structured that Fisher Apple Academy if you want to. To give you some ideas about how big of a push this was on campus, 258 faculty and staff have completed 1.0. That's like almost all of them. That's a lot of us. And then 2.0 was about 115 people. So really, instead of just like the early adopters on campus, this has been a major shift of the curve now so that many more faculty and staff that are engaged with students feel comfortable, have access to a device, and have practiced it. So it felt really good to be part of this big movement of campus. So the other piece that comes with this is the student piece, right? So we call this the iFisher Next Generation Learning Initiative. So what this meant is starting this last fall, all incoming first-year students in our undergraduate program and all of our undergraduates were issued an iPad. So pretty amazing undertaking. The library space was actually used for a lot of that delivery, right? And so with that, students got the iPad. It came with a keyboard and an Apple Pencil. There was also preloaded with apps, the Microsoft Suite and an app called Notability, which I'll talk about later. Now, the really great part about this is that any one of us on campus who engage with students can then have an understanding that all of the students have access to the same software. We didn't have to worry about, well, what if somebody had this and not this? So it's really this wonderful idea of, I know you have an iPad, I know you have this app, I know you have the pencil. Therefore, any one of us can design activities that'll work around it. So far, we have deployed 2,554 iPads to students and 358 to faculty and staff. Now, for the bigger campuses, those numbers might not seem like a lot, but for us, remember our FTE is about 4,000. This was a big undertaking. In addition to those first year and undergraduate students, we also gave them to our first year pharmacy students. So we have a graduate pharmacy school as well. And one of my examples would be from that today. So one of the apps I want to introduce is Notability. Now, apps come and go, right? We have tons of apps. I really just want to talk about the ability for this app to transform the classrooms and how I've specifically used it with library instruction. I'm going to demo it later too. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is that our DePeter Center for Teaching really pushes us to think about the SAMR model, where the S stands for substitution. This is just a quick substitution, right? Augmentation. Is there a functional improvement by using this app over what we had before? And then really, modification allows significant task redesign. This is where things start to get fun. And then, I can't even read my own handwriting what the R stands for, but it's the allows for creation of new tasks, previously inconceivable. So for example, when we're talking about virtual reality overlays for math, right, that professors can now use with their iPads with students. And so when I thought about the Notability app and this SAMR model, really traditional note-taking, we're writing on a print source, right? I'm assuming everybody has familiarity with this. But what I love about the Notability app is that it gives you continuous pages. You never run out of paper, right? You can keep going down. If you're an instructor that it was used to the whiteboard and you get to the bottom and you'd have to go over, this just keeps going and going. You're able to connect multiple PDFs together, which is fantastic, in one single file. You can connect PDFs in blank space. You have unlimited colors. One of the economics professors on campus said that she used to use so many different colors to draw her graphs. She was constantly running out of ink in her pens, that using the Notability app to then do these handwritten graphs, she has access to unlimited colors and different widths. These may seem like tiny things, but anybody who's been in a classroom with chalkboard and you're erasing chalk dust, and you're also, working with dry erase markers and one of them dies, it's so wonderful to remove that as a barrier. It also has a zoom in, zoom out. I love this feature. So if you run out of room, but you want students to see on a chalkboard or a dry erase board, right, even if they're the ones writing it or making examples, it's hard for everyone to see. With Notability, we can zoom in and zoom out. So I can write tiny little notes that are attached to something and zoom back to see maybe a bigger picture. The next one I actually saw students do in my class last night. You can move blocks of annotations. So they wrote a few phrases, they highlighted it, and moved that phrase to a different part of their worksheet to connect it to a different thought that they had, right? And then the last piece is you can do a voiceover while writing. So you can add audio to your files that you can then share with students. So now that the staff had iPads, we were trained, the students had iPads, right? We had the shared software. I just wanted to spend a second about the iPad ready classrooms. And really this was the physical classrooms, because we were focusing on a transition back to face-to-face. And so all of our classrooms now have an Apple TV. Let me get to that. So we can screen mirror. So this is a little bit logistics for those people who haven't seen the iPad do this. I had not. I had seen this kind of thing in my personal life, but not really in a classroom setting. And so in all of our classrooms now in the teacher station, there's literally a button now that has the Apple symbol on it. It's like turning the lights on and off. You hit the button, and what happens is the screen mirroring pops up on the screen, and then we have a code that comes up, right? And the code can be picked up by any student or any person in the room. So it's super simple. We don't have to be inside a learning management system or a course management system, right? There's nothing, no double layers of authentication. We just push the button, it comes up, and then whoever puts in the code is then screen mirroring. It's super simple for students to do, right? For them to grab that dynamic code. And I've actually done it completely ad hoc without training any students. and they go through it wonderfully. So I did want to say that because of my liaison areas, I'm in the sciences, that a couple of our campus early adopters and fellows who were faculty leaders in this Apple initiative, they were in my liaison areas. So I did want to mention there was kind of the expectation and the people in my areas that were doing this already in their classrooms. So that did give me a good nudge to say, this is something that I should really look at myself too. It also gave me some good people to look at, to watch and model to see how they use it in their classrooms. I also practiced this in an empty classroom, which was fantastic, right? No students there to see me get it right or get it wrong. And so it's just really wonderful. And one of the things I love it, and I'm going to go back to my big grid, is oftentimes classrooms in a university or college setting look exactly like they've always looked, right? A front of the room and rows. But if I could ask for a show of hands or thumbs, who's had experience with classrooms now that are switching to pods or multiple screens all over the room? So April has that. Dr. Elise Jordan. Right, so we're a little bit of a mix on my campus, but I do teach quite regularly in a few classrooms where everybody's in pods. Each pod has its own screen. I work in a classroom that has a big screen in the front, a small screen in the back, 8 tables, and each table has a screen. So there is no front to the classroom. So the great thing about screen mirroring is I don't have to be at the teacher station to run the class. I can take my iPad, move to any location, switch that location. I can screen mirror and then run the class with the iPad. So I find this to be very flexible. I used to use a remote keyboard before, plugged into the teacher station and move around. But now with the additional features of the iPad that I'm going to show you, it's really helped in those classrooms that have no true front. So I did want to now move into the library land. Now that you have the background of how did Michelle get into the iPads, what was the push on our campus? What were the expectations for the students? What did they have access to? I want to bring it back to our library here. And librarians participated at different levels for the Apple Academy due to many different reasons. Some of us have more instruction focused jobs, so that was a more natural fit. Other people had different projects that were conflicting right at the same time that the Academy was run. So with a small staff, we kind of did these at different times. And so the use of iPads in library instruction was optional in the fall. We have not pushed to, just because campus is one-to-one, now we must use them. So we've continued that same notion from for fiscal year 21-22. So the examples I'm going to show today are in some of the classes that I've used it, but I want to let you know I don't always use my iPad in a classroom. So I have 4 examples to share with you today. One general biology lab I did on Zoom, one of our in-person first-year learning community classes, research writing class for nursing juniors, and then moving into that graduate level class to first-year pharmacy students. And I am proud and happy to share with you some things that didn't work today too. Sometimes when I got surprised or caught off guard, I just want to make sure that you see the full range of the experiences I've had with the iPad. So a general biology lab that I teach, there was 8 sections on Zoom in fall of 2020. So this was back a little bit, and I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to start from over here so you guys can see it. Oh, one sec, guys. I need to make myself the host, my other self the host. April, can you help me quickly to make my iPad person a host as well?
Done. You should be able to.
Thank you. Okay. So what you're seeing now is my Notability app, and it's really simple. It's set up like lots of other things where we have the ability to organize folders over here to the left. You can color code. what I have here is the actual notes that I used for this lab. And I'm going to show you how awesome this was when we were working together. So imagine we were in a class together and we had students work on a project for an hour. So they had to follow autism as it first came out from the Wakefield article in 1998. And then follow it over a decade or so. So you can see this is a Google Sheet I shared with all of the groups. And then individually, the groups worked on filling this out. They had to identify, was this publication type scholarly, popular, trade, right? Was the article type primary, secondary? And what was the suggestion to autism? Now, what you're seeing here is not their example of all the different groups. It was my final one. And this is what we used to discuss it. So as you can see here, I had used different colors, right? And so what we were trying to find out, and I'm just going to go ahead and use some colors right now so that you can see how this worked. We were trying to see, when we talked about the difference between scholarly and popular, what was the best fit line? So we drew some best fit lines, and I have a gigantic pen there so you guys can see the difference between that and their class, right? And then how easily I can change colors. Oh, but then when we look at the popular literature, the best fit line is in a different place, right? So in a Zoom setting, this was fantastic, right? So it's much clearer. I could change colors, right? We talked about how some things are related, right? So I'm using colors to move back and forth. Now these files could be shared afterwards. I can save them on here. So this app was fantastic for something that I once used to do on a whiteboard. I would project this up and use my markers and try to make it, and then my back was in the way. So in our move to Zoom labs, this was a great way for us to be able to quickly and easily, with color, right, and with free hands, to be able to wrap up this lab. So that was an example of Notability and how you're able to use it on Zoom. And I actually used it last night in a class when I had some students that were on Zoom and some that were in the classroom. So we used that to be able to broadcast to all of the students who are participating in the class. So in our first year learning communities, now moving on to my second example, we were in a library classroom, which is in the basement of the library. It's old, there's no windows, it's not my favorite place. And not all the students had their iPads with them. And that's okay, because remember, it's not an expectation yet, or as librarians, we're guests in the classroom and we, work with the expectations of the teacher. So this teacher did not have a requirement that every student had to have their iPad, but it was wonderful that a few did. And so what I was able to do is we were going through some of our first year activities. I asked people who had an iPad if they'd be willing to mirror, right? Very simple to get through the technology. And so what we were able to do is something that I would normally demo, they were now driving. Now you might say, oh, it's just as easy to ask a student to walk up to the front of the computer. And I said this at first too. I'm going to show you another example of how screen mirroring is a little bit better. But what we were able to do is this classroom is really oddly set up, and it is hard moved to the front of the classroom. I had a student in the back row in the ring. He walked us through limiting the results to find just ebooks, bringing up the entry, finding the full text of the ebook, looking at the citation. So what that allowed me to do through the rest of the class was to use some, teaching techniques tied to now that experience of using your iPad. Oh, remember, and Joel, you're up on my screen, so I'm gonna use your name. Oh, do you remember when Joel walked us through about how to use the filter for the ebook? Remember on his iPad? So it really gave them some more ownership of the content. And so I was able to do this with 2 different students. So it didn't have to be the whole classroom. And I just found the engagement in that classroom, even for the students who didn't have their iPad, just went way up, right? Because the students were sitting in their seat next to them. It felt like their peer even more because they were literally sitting with their peer who was then driving the activity. So third out of the examples is I worked with a research writing class for our nursing students. And so I had the wonderful opportunity to work on a quantitative literacy lesson. I'm going to go back to my big squares here and ask, does anybody have access to Policy Map at their institution? You can thumbs up me. It's a resource to pull together statistical resources and allows you to use geographic mapping at the same time. So it looks like from the room it's not very popular, but it's one of my favorites. And when we started to talk about the needs of this assignment and where the topics were that some of the professors wanted to cover, I thought it was a great marriage. So what I tried to do was to build this great quantitative literacy lab where students went through Policy Map with a concept in mind. We were talking about obesity here, and get the data, pull it down, and then we're going to run some analysis on it, right? So I will share with you, big old fail for myself. I was able to figure out how to do this on Sheets, how to do it on Excel, how to do it from a PC. But in the days that I had to prep for this class, you can see my screen here taken right from my iPad. I was just really struggling with file management and how to cut and paste and get things into Sheets. I feel like in the future, I hope in the future, I'll be able to come back and tell you, wow, I figured out what I did wrong. But if I figured I had gone through all of this training, I'm comfortable with my iPad, if I keep messing this up, I can't realistically expect the students to be able to do this in a classroom setting that only lasts about an hour. So I did want to share with you guys an example of where I thought it was going to work and it just didn't work yet. So the last example I'll share is a little bit of the surprises. So I work with first-year pharmacy students, and I work with them both online and face-to-face. This example is from the face-to-face. And we had a pretty classic first-year lesson where we were working on citations and PubMed. And so I'm going to show you, switch now to my other screen. That there were definitely some surprises, right? Surprises don't have to be earth-shattering, but they're just small ones. There we are. As librarians, I think we're really good at being a couple seconds ahead of the students, right? We can look at that list of results faster than the other student. We can see the color of their screen and we're like, oh, they're not in EBSCO because I don't see the EBSCO colors. I see the ProQuest colors, right? So there's these little, failures are the way to learn. So there's all these little moments where we are using the cues from our environment to figure out our next steps or to very quickly to respond to a student. And sometimes we might not even recognize that we're doing this. So I just wanted to point out two features in the iPad that my students were using this semester that kind of broke my step here when we were talking about, oh, I'm used to seeing it a certain way. And so one of them here in the settings is under the control center, display and brightness, is that you can change your display to dark. Now, guys, I know that that wasn't huge, but the first time I had a student who had their iPad set to dark and I came over to try to work with them and help them out on something, my eye couldn't figure out what to do. It thought that something was wrong, that it wasn't working out the right way. So it's very little things, but now having experienced it already, I'm like, oh, okay. I tell myself they're on dark mode. That's the difference. And it doesn't have too much of a difference depending on where you're going, but on certain pages, it really is, if you can see here, the change between the light and the dark, it really is a change of how we can perceive what's happening on their screens. And let me show you one other thing that they were doing that surprised me. Where did I have this? I'll just make a new note then. Nope. Oh, there we go. So somebody did this in class. So I saw them taking notes and I saw this. And at first I thought, what is happening to their screens? And what it is in this note-taking app, you're able to change the color of your paper. And you can add grid lines, you can add rules, but then you can change away from the white. Now, obviously, I had gone through the training and knew that there was some flexibility and notability, but I had never expected the students to change it to black. And I think that really surprised me because then I walked over to their worksheets or their notes and it came up like this. So those were just some of those little pieces that I was starting to notice when I was working with students, that I now have to retrain my eye to see, oh, okay, it's black, it's okay. At first I thought maybe something was broken with their iPad or that my worksheet hadn't worked, but it was just, this is their preference. I did want to point out that when I was working with those first year pharmacy students, right, that one of the cool things about the power of screencasting is the ability to have students build very complicated searches first and then show us how they got there. And so while we often have students show us searches and they might be shorter ones, in these classes, people were building very long searches with multiple subject headings. So with the screencasting, the screen mirroring, I was able to give them work time to build those responses, and then they would screen mirror. And each student can show us the complicated search they built without us all sitting there waiting for them to build it, right? So in that class time, I was able to show more examples, and we were able to talk about how the different techniques each student used, not waiting for a person at the teacher station to type that search in and to get it ready. And so one of the things, and I see all the messages in chat about, right, eye fatigue, right? Zoom has really helped us be more conscious about how long are we on the computer, you know, using our blue light glasses, changing the colors. So this is just one of those pieces I think that's going to evolve and change, you know, as students have more flexibility over their own devices. What colors would we expect to see? So it was interesting to me that they actually started to use color in their note taking. So when I asked them to build these searches, they started to color code their Boolean operators, right? They put all their Boolean operators in red, they put all of their search statements in blue, and then they put all of their parentheses in green. So it was really interesting for me to see how that better access to color is really enhancing their understanding of the different pieces of a search. It's not just a gimmick. So I really love to see that piece of it. So let me just finish. And April, I think that's putting me at a good time. I have one slide left. Those were the 4 examples. And the last one is just talking about some 2 major pieces of different ways to file share. And one is the classroom app. This is like a classroom management software that works with the iPads. It allows you to transfer links and documents real easy, but it's really K through 12 focused, and there's a lot of privacy concerns. So if all the students are in the classroom app at any time, me as the teacher, I could see whatever they were doing on their app, which app they have open during the hour of my class, which apps were they on? Were they on Instagram for 50 minutes and they were only on the library website for 5? So while Classroom app was available to us on campus, it's not something that I've used right now, simply because the pros did not outweigh some of the cons. So instead, you know, really thinking more about the possibilities of AirDrop. So this is the ability to share files when 2 iPads or iDevices are near each other, right? And so the great thing about this, especially as librarians, is sometimes we're coming into a setting as a guest, right? Maybe even if we're embedded, we can do some document collection without an LMS, right? So maybe if you tried a slightly different teaching technique in this class and you want to collect something for assessment, right? It doesn't have to be a gigantic piece to negotiate with the professor. You can just say, AirDrop me that document that you worked on. It's great for on-the-fly decisions. One of the cons is done by proximity. So if you're really close to another classroom, right, other students might get that message, but nothing's automatic. People have to accept it. So when we talked about this on campus, it's the pros still far outweigh the possible cons of a student sitting close to the door getting your message. The other con is, though, if you're working with really large classrooms, if you had students AirDrop stuff to you on your iPad, you have to accept each one. Doable with a class of 20, not something I'm going to try in my class of 8s. And so this is kind of our early exploration of some of these larger kind of management systems here on campus. And then I'm just going to throw that thank you ones up there. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to grab those last 2 chats. And so Esther had some great questions. Yes, so as the librarians, we were really discussing how much time do we want to take from the library lessons to teach iPad issues or iPad questions? Because it can get quite complex. So if you have a lesson that doesn't need iPads, right, then maybe you don't get into all those issues. If you're joining a class that you know uses the classroom app, right, having those discussions with the professor about privacy issues. So the great thing about our campus is they did issue some boilerplate language for people to use in their syllabus if they were going to use classroom app. From our fellows on campus, they gave some really great practical tips about, we are using classroom app, I'm turning it on now, right? So letting people change over their machines, turn off anything else they didn't want their professors to see. So we've had some really great people to follow if that's the direction you wanted to go in. And so I think that was all from the chat, and I think I caught up.
And we had one question from early in the chat. Do you bill the students for the iPads, or did you come up with a grant or donor to pay for all the iPads?
Oh, of course, right? This is always the discussion. So part of it is we had some really great, wonderful, innovative thinkers that said, what is the cost of us not doing this? As everyone is fighting for recruitment in New York State, right? So we had our economic cost, but then there was the economic possible loss, right? Where we're not attracting students. And so I would not say it was a gimmick. I would say it was a strategic move. So the actual economic cost was still there though. Once we decided this was an opportunity we wanted to grab, the cost was still there. And yes, I will say that our team here on campus was fantastic, and they were able to use a very large donor to fund this initiative to move forward. How that magic happens, I'm not sure, but I know it was a donor.
Well, that kind of ties into one of my questions is, we used to do iPads for all of our incoming freshmen. And what happened was, we made our students buy their own iPads so that we were putting the cost on them, and they would use it in their Making Connection class and no other class because the faculty were not using them in the classroom. So this created a sort of resentment with the students that they bought this piece of technology, and for basically what ended up for most of them being one class. So how do you get the faculty buy-in?
So I'm so glad you brought that up, April, and I'm glad I put in kind of the numbers for our campus. And the way we got around that was jumping in with 2 feet. This is a whole campus initiative. All of those faculty were trained, right? So it is not a requirement that faculty use them, but so many people are comfortable and so many students are comfortable, it has really become part of the culture. Now, yes, it is dabbled across, but I will walk into lots of classrooms. I see students with their iPads. I can see from my office right now, some people in the library have their iPads that are up too. In my class last night, students were using them in different ways. And so one of the things that helps with this, April, too, is that we purchase it for them and then they keep it. And then there's some kind of details as we move forward about a buyout. You can either keep the item, return it. So I think the college really worked out that piece for students. Like, I'm a senior, I don't want to pay for this machine and now I have to return it, right? And so we decided just to do all the costs in-house so that it wasn't anything that the student was paying for directly. And so it was a programmatic approach. And so they'll be able to have some upgrades, turn those in. I think it's all part of our official relationship with Apple. But yeah, the students are learning how to take notes on side-by-side screens, split screens. So even in classes where the professor's not using it, the students are starting to use it already. So the culture is starting to shift.
Do you see that some students are still preferring their iPhones? Because we're seeing that a lot on our campus. They're even doing their Blackboard work through iPhones.
I would have said before this past year, people were like, I can do this on my phone. But now, because the iPads are so compact, the cases we gave them, they're very soft. The keyboard is easy to flip and it holds the pen. I am seeing them everywhere. So I am not seeing their phones. They're all the same color too, so it's so easy to see across campus.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Keeping an eye on the chat too.
I will mention, April and I had chatted a little bit about some accessibility features. I haven't mentioned those. There really are some neat things in here that allow students with any kind of accommodation needs, or uh, a lot of us too, like that need to blow up the text, that need to read the text, that need to change the background color. One of my favorite features that I've yet to try out is that you have the ability to, with any kind of Apple ear device, you can put your iPad near a speaker and hit a certain setting and it'll beam right to your earphones. And so I was thinking about, oh my gosh, I've been trying to do reference consultations sometimes in an open space and it's very loud and I'm having trouble hearing the other person. Could we use more of these accessibility features, right, in other settings in the classroom? So I'm hoping that'll be some of my next steps, is to figure out how some of those could work.
You mentioned earlier about the iPads increasing engagement, pretty much the peer leaders, the peers showing it. Do you also show that you get more like student volunteers and participants when you do ask for those people to, hey, will you show the class how to do this, since they can sit in their chair and not have to stand in front of the classroom and be on the spot?
Yeah, the barrier is much lower, right? They literally don't even have to raise up, which sometimes makes people nervous. No one has to look at them like they're at the front. So all of the students are looking at the screen while the student is driving with the screen mirroring. So I think it does take away some of those barriers as before. And if we're talking about accessibility too, I don't have to worry about if my device is set to a different accessibility setting that their own device is set at. And I don't even need to know what they have it set at. And so they could have on their iPad something that actually helps them with touch. If they have, if touching with two fingers or at the same time is difficult, there's different settings that you can do. So there's so much customization that a user can use on their iPad in order to shortcut or to use one hand instead of two hands. So it actually really helps with that kind of issue. Will they be comfortable with the teacher station that I'm sending them to?
And when they screen share, does the screen or screen mirroring control a central screen too?
It doesn't control the central screen. It's literally taking whatever's on their iPad and sending it up to the big screen that we've designated through the technology setup. And that's a fixed screen. So it's just part of the room setup. Wherever you hit the Apple, it goes to whatever screen is in that room for ones that have multiples. So they don't have any ability to change anything that's on the teacher station or anything that you might already have loaded up for the class at another point. It's literally like swapping. We're now just seeing what they see.
Kind of like how you did earlier when you were on your iPad doing the demo. Any other questions? What is the teacher station?
Oh, so the teacher station is just, I'm referring to where our campus IT houses all of the computer and IT necessary to run that room. It's usually located in some central table or podium in the room. And so it might look different on different campuses. Ours have a central kind of look to them, but it's one standard PC. Some of our classrooms still now have like an overhead projector. And actually they got new life, and I'll tell you why we still have them. And then it's all of the equipment that you need there in a kind of a stack. The overhead projectors actually were repurposed to use as cameras for when we needed to Zoom classes high flex. When we had some students in class and when we had some students joining us online, we were able to flip the overhead projector cameras and then show the classroom so that the students can engage with each other better. It was a really kind of cool way to repurpose some old technology.
Is there anything you wish, if you could talk to yourself now at the beginning of this iPad project, advice that you would give yourself?
Use what you expect students to use. It was really helpful, right? Like if I really thought that splitting my screen into two pieces so I could read an ebook and take notes on the right was helpful for students, I should try it myself. And I actually found out that the finger motion for splitting your screen to be able to do two different apps, I could not figure it out for the life of me, April. I knew how it was supposed to work. And so actually our Depeter Center helped me actually with one of those accessibility accommodations. And I created a shortcut to be able to do that feature myself. So now if I'm watching a webinar, I can have the other screen up with the Google Doc, and I can actually type some of my notes in it. So really trying some of the features that we think might work for students so that we understand some of those hiccups and how well it could work.
So how do you split screens?
Oh, Debbie, I wish I knew. It's not that hard, but it's hard for me. It's a simple kind of swiping mechanism that you have to do it with. But I can never get it. So here, I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to share my content again. And I just like to stop video so you guys don't see the top of my head. Okay, so now we're sharing screens. So you should be able to see it. Is it coming?
No, not yet.
Oh. It says I'm sharing screen. So it could be just at the very end here that it's decided to stop working. I'll try it one more time. And also, as you notice here, one of the things too is just being comfortable with these silences between technology shifts. It's something as librarians that we've always had to deal with, but the anxiety of the iPad made other librarians and myself at times feel like we needed to get these connections perfect every single time, but you don't. And so I have trouble with the fingers for the splitting the screen. So I have this little button up here. This is my accessibility options. And this is what I've customized so that I can do things easier. And it's called multitasking. And so now I'm going to pin my new app on the right. And in addition to Zoom, I want to get my Notability app up. And so now you can see that I can start to share the screen. So now I've split it evenly. I got a nice little ad here from Notability. And so I could start to use my pen, and my screen sharing screen's not so exciting, but this is how the idea works, is that you could have two pieces up at the same time, any two apps. And then I have trouble making them go away too. And so then I use this as well. Remove left split view. And now you guys just see Notability. So even for someone who was trained to do one of the features in the iPad, I still wasn't able to do it. So it's these accessibility features that I'm just really excited about for all of our users moving forward, for anybody who's struggling with any of those things. So that was the split screen, or they call it multitasking.
And I've also seen students use accessibility, like if the home button doesn't work right or something, they can go in and close apps that way. So there's a lot of really cool things you could do through that accessibility panel.
So that little gray box that came up, to be honest, Esther, I'm trying to remember how I even got that up. I believe I was walked through by one of the wonderful staff at our DePeters Teaching Center, and they were able to keep that little box up for me. And that is I believe you get it from the settings menu under accessibility, and that's where a lot of those things are packed down in there. April and I had talked about, do we need another session about all the cool accessibility features of the iPad? And so that could be something in the future as I learn more about them and test them out too.
Well, just accessibility in general. I think we do a decent job, hopefully, of like spreading the chairs out in the classroom, but I don't think a lot of us are really translating our accessibility thoughts into the online environment or the hybrid environments, because hybrid has their own challenges, making sure that you're with both students and that the online students are getting the same level of quality and content that those in-person students are, and that you're being equal, or not paying too much attention to the online students, and you throw your in-person students into a corner. So those type of conversations. So I have another question. I guess this is going to be for everyone, and I'm going to let you all laugh at me. So I'm a heavy mobile user. I got my phone, I got my computer. So have you ever found yourself trying to like zoom in on a piece of paper because you're so used to being on your mobile device and you forget that the rest of the world doesn't work like that? or you touch your computer monitor, you're trying to zoom on your computer monitor. Yeah. Yeah.
April, I think I more often dial 9 to get out at my house, because on campus we have to dial a certain number to get out. So I think that is my weird, I live in a different moment kind of thing. But I have not yet moved to the pinch and grab. But when I do, I'm going to think of you, and then I'll send you an email.
I've done it more than once. I'm going through old photos. So I'm like, oh, I think that's my grandma on the back, and I'm trying to zoom in. Like, okay, I just walk away. I don't dial 9 to get out because I don't have a landline, but I have answered my cell phone with April Shepherd, A State Library. So I really confuse the telemarketers. Any other questions? We have time for one more, if there's any. But thank you, Michelle. Oh, let's see here. Not so much a question. Esther says she was reading about a child who was visiting a friend and was so surprised when they asked Alexa to turn the lights, to turn on the lights, and nothing happened. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Terrific. Really great job. It was really nice to see. I'm glad you had your iPad up too, to see it live, to see what the iPad looks like. I think that added a lot to it. Mm-hmm. I will get this converted and I will send out the web recording no later than tomorrow. We'll see how long it takes me to convert it and get it on YouTube and all that.
Great. Thanks, April.
Thank you, everyone.